Okay, it's great to see everyone. I want to share with folks, and I'll probably share again if folks sign on a little later. Tomorrow in the Juneau area, there's going to be, well, let me just find the flyer and information so that folks can see it, and we can go over what's going on and what the purpose is of this gathering. So tomorrow, starting at 5:30, there is, well, there's actually a few events that are going on. Let's see if we can zoom in. There we go. So it's a day of community healing. I know this has been, there's two sort of phrases that go along with some of these activities, Orange Shirt Day and also Every Child Matters. I've been thinking about these, and I don't know if either of those terms really get to the heart of what's being talked about, but it's a healing event for survivors of boarding schools and residential schools. And there is one standing school that we know of. There's actually probably several in Alaska. I think there needs to be some more research done about schools that have become other things. So there's probably a whole bunch of them all throughout Alaska that at one point were boarding schools. And for Native American peoples, when we say boarding school, we're not just talking about a place where you go and live and go to school and a residential school. Those have particular meanings for a lot of Native American peoples. Those were the vehicles through which our languages were systematically destroyed, or at least attempted to be destroyed. And so some of the elders that I've worked with and talked to have shared some of their firsthand accounts and also things that they heard about that people had experienced at a number of these different places. So there are a couple of things going on tomorrow in the Juneau area. At 6:45 to 7:45, folks are gathering to wave at cars at what's called the wetlands pullout on the way to town, coming from the valley or the airport just after Sunny Point. So there's a bit of a bird lookout that's out there. Oops, get the lights going. The second event starts at 5:30 p.m. and is an awareness rally. And we're going to talk about a couple of different pretty substantial things. One is the histories and impacts of boarding schools, and also the history and impacts of the burning of homes in order to build white towns, in particular Douglas in this area. So we are going to have testimony and the sharing of stories of someone who was there when he was a young man when they burned this family's house down. And it's pretty horrible. So we're going to talk about these things, and we're also going to walk into a school that's now a Montessori school. It's not the same thing at all, but it was one of the last schools to be operated by the Bureau of Indian Education in Alaska, and we're going to have a healing ceremony there. So there are a series of events I wanted you folks to know about. The one starting at 5:30 will be broadcast on Facebook through the Facebook page of Alaska Native Sisterhood Camp 2. So it's ANS Camp 2. And there's a number of different folks who are working on putting this event together. Gold Belt Heritage, Gold Belt Corporation, Hatuch Lachish program through AWARE, the Juneau Montessori School, which is housed in that building now, Clinton Haida, Sealaska Corporation, and the University of Alaska Southeast. So there's also a whole series of events, and I'll probably be uploading some of this stuff to our class's webpage tonight, and also trying to kind of build our class webpage. And I'll talk about that here in a second. as we sort of look at some of these things, one of the intentions is to increase the dialogue about what kinds of things have happened to Indigenous peoples, and then also to increase the conversations on who is now accountable for helping out with our language revitalization and with the healing of our peoples. Because a lot of what we're trying to do is a lot more complicated than just trying to teach someone a language. We're trying to systemically decolonize and overcome historical traumas and make our peoples fairly whole again, as far as trying to be unified behind some of the language ideologies that are required to bring a language back to day-to-day use if it's not there already. There are going to be some talking circles here, and if folks are interested in similar types of activities in your community, the planning committee can certainly work with you folks and share what we have done. This started out with, I think, the initiative of several individuals and has grown into the initiative of a fairly large working group. So some of the things that we are trying to do is share a lot of resources about Orange Shirt Day, about Indigenous boarding and residential schools, about intergenerational trauma, cultural healing, the Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, and just trying to sort of, one, increase the amount that we talk about this stuff. Because if this type of thing happened to white people, this would be in every history book in the United States of America in a pretty significant way. But it didn't, and it isn't. And so we're trying to sort of say, let's talk about this more so it does become a real experience for those who don't understand what peoples have gone through. But then to also talk about resources for survivors and descendants. These conversations can be very triggering. These conversations can also just cause us to look at a lot of systemic depression, sometimes self-harm, sometimes group harm, sometimes harm of others that exist within our communities that also often stand in the way of a full-fledged language revitalization movement taking off. So we're trying to share a lot of resources, share a lot of ideas. This will be taking place for those of you who are in the Juneau area, starting at 5:30 tomorrow at the Sandy Beach area. It's called Pioneer Park, I think. Somewhat ironically is the name of the park. And then the event will be Facebook Live if folks would like to watch it. And I do believe once you live stream something, folks can watch it later as well. So I'm going to get the lights back on. And does anybody have any thoughts or things they want to share or talk about regarding activities like this?
For Tlingit language class, we're writing some sentences about boarding schools in the language. And will we be sharing those tonight or is that next Monday?
We'll share those on Monday.
Okay, like a cheese.
And the intermediate Tlingit class is going to do the same thing. And so it is a bit of a hefty undertaking for language learners to now write about trauma, but I think our languages need to be utilized to talk about everything. And I think there's a lot of healing aspects within our language, and there's a lot we can sort of reflect upon, in particular for me, the ones who suffered through it. Marge, I think of Marge Dutson a lot in these regards because she shared her personal history with me of what happened to her when she went to this school that we're going to go to. So she was probably 5 years old, and her older sibling told her not to speak Tlingit in the school. And Tlingit was her first language. So I think if you sent any 5-year-old and whatever their primary language is, and you told them to go somewhere for 6, 7, 8 hours and to not speak that language, I just don't think it's going to happen. So she went and she saw other kids that she knew, and she's speaking to them in Tlingit because she passed away a few years ago and she was 95 years old. So when she was growing up, every Tlingit child probably spoke Tlingit. And at least pretty close to everyone. And So she was speaking Tlingit, and the teacher called her up in front of the class and lifted her up by her hair and shook her violently and threatened to hit her if she did it. She kept speaking the language. And she was traumatized, and she went home, and she said her hair was all over the place, and her dad probably just about killed that teacher, because what do you do when your kid comes home from school and that type of thing happens? And it was pretty systemic. Like, this was not the exception to the rule. There are teachers as well who documented their efforts. They called them heroic efforts, soaking rags in these chemicals that would burn kids' mouths and be super bitter, and putting the rags in the mouths of the children who were speaking their language. There's plenty of other stories that exist all across Native America about things that teachers did, and these were teachers who probably worked for state governments, federal governments, religious institutions, and some of the conversations that I'm hoping we'll all engage in is the what now conversation. Because if I go out and break a window, they're going to ask me to pay for that window. And so if people go out and systemically do stuff, like convincing us in this part of the world to cut down our totem poles and to stop dancing with masks and to stop composing new songs and to stop using our language and to stop having so many ceremonies and so many things that were taken from us and that we were prohibited from, like laws that said you could not have pu'ik or a potlatch anymore, which is up and down the northwest coast in Canada and Alaska in the United States. And so these are some things that I think are worth talking about now because these impact the things that we're trying to do. I know I'll share a photo with you folks. Let me find it. Anybody have any other thoughts about this stuff? I know it's tough stuff to talk about, so please practice self-care. Please reach out if you're having a hard time with anything, and we'll try to collaborate and figure out how to overcome some of these things. So I saw this picture, I think, on Instagram, and I thought it was really good. So let me zoom in here. So, and it says learning a European language journey, and it says books, classes, immersion, and then you go down. It says learning Anishinaabe, which is the Ojibwe language journey. Take a few language classes once a week. Learn like 5 spelling systems, dealing with intergenerational trauma, figuring out the special words from each community, speaking and joking with some elders. And so, you know, and in some ways, we sort of look at the trauma of things, but in other ways, I just like how this one ends because it's not walking, it's gymnastics, and it's, you know, jumping over burning objects, and it's a whole bunch of other stuff like that. And it's not to say that other people got it easy, but it's just saying it's a different situation. But I like the way it ends because there was an elder named Kaklake, Norman James, and he lives in Carcross. And one time I was sitting and visiting with him, and he said, when I was a young man, I used to sit around the village, and I see the old people walking around, and I think, gee, they're just trying to walk around and trying to find someone to laugh with. He says, now that I'm an old man, I just walk around and try and find someone to laugh with. And so he and I would have a lot of fun because we'd laugh in our language and we'd talk to each other and tell stories and laugh and stuff. And getting to that point of laughter that's a lot less restricted and that's just a lot more common, I think is at the core of a lot of our goals. And maybe next week we'll also look at some videos from the Ahapuna Leo, where you can see just little kids just speaking Hawaiian, like really, really speaking, and that's another healing element as well. So this event is going on tomorrow, so I just want to let you folks know and just encourage each of your areas and regions to consider developing similar types of activities because the healing aspects of language is one of the things that I've been trying to sort of think about and figure out different ways to approach it, because we have a lot of folks who can understand our language but have a really hard time speaking it. And sometimes when they would share openly about wanting to speak, some of them say they feel like their throat is closing, or they feel like their breathing gets real shallow and their heartbeat gets really fast. There was one elder, and I said, "Hey, you should come." He said, "Oh, you're here for that language camp?" I was like, "Yeah, you should come. It'll be fun." And he said, "Well, I'd like to, but every time I think about speaking the language, that man's right there. He's going to hit me again." And just thinking about some of these traumas, and some of these traumas are inherited. Some of these traumas are they result in unpredictable reactions to people. Someone I know saw an elderly person from our community and said hi to them, and they were just super angry. And so this person said, "Hey, what you angry about?" And they said, "Well, my kid is learning Tlingit in the schools." And this is a Tlingit person. So the person who was talking to them said, "Well, isn't that a good thing though?" And that person said, "Yes. But when I went to school, I got hit for speaking the language. Now my kid's just going to learn it." And it creates complicated feelings because there was anger about the fact that there was this in existence, even though at their core they probably supported the language and its revitalization. So I think some of these things can be really tricky. Salaktunak, thank you for posting. Klayanak. First Alaskans is having a coffee time on healing on their Facebook page tomorrow from 10 to 12. And I think as we sort of go and we start nearing some of these things, and as we rethink holidays, like Columbus Day, what was Columbus Day, and then Thanksgiving and some other things, and just the way those are connected in various ways to Native American peoples, I think as we see some shifts to say, oh, well, let's not just connect it tangentially, let's actually do something like Indigenous Peoples Day that we do instead of Columbus Day. And as we sort of see some of these things being implemented, I think one of the things that I can recall is seeing the Truth and Reconciliation proceedings that were going on in Canada and watching those from afar and thinking, wow, that's really hardcore, but I think it's really good that that's happening. I also don't trust the government to actually do anything. However, I do think that government-sponsored listening sessions that result in laws, I mean, if you look at the money and the efforts flowing into language revitalization in Canada, I do believe it's significantly higher. I do think it's easier to make a sustainable program, but I still don't think you see language revitalization exploding like you might consider would happen if only the government would back us up. And so it is more complicated than that. But I just thought, any other thoughts? Boarding school, residential school, overcoming trauma, how that impacts your program? That's a big thing to start with.
So, as you mentioned, the person who reacted to their kids being able to learn in anger, I had a very direct experience with something similar. I was meeting with an elder to specifically try to learn the language, and one of her elder children just blew up at us and was really upset and mad that we were trying to do this. And in that same exact kind of tone and way that we were beaten, for this, and now you're trying to learn, it's not going to work. I mean, he just exploded at us. It's not going to work. This is just pissing me off. I can't even be in here. And there were bunches of other things. And so we just listened, quietly waiting, sat. We didn't necessarily end up looking at words and language learning for the rest of that day, but we didn't stop what we were planning to do. And later, weeks later and months later, I still would go and visit. We didn't find our way to actually learn language. So I wouldn't say that prevented us and stopped us from trying. We ended up using our visiting time to visit and do other things. We couldn't figure out how to approach learning anyway. But every now and then, that same adult who couldn't even stand to be in that space and said so and was really upset with us for trying to do this will offer hints to me of how glad he is that we're doing this and trying to do it. And so we, like I said, we both were just quiet and we just took it. We didn't respond, but because we both recognized the gut reaction, the instinct that came out and allowed it to be. We didn't try to sway, but we allowed it to run its course. And so that has changed with that time to be able to be comfortable with it. And so I just wanted to share that because you would never expect it. It just defies logic. But sometimes our gut reaction, our instincts, our protective measures can't help but kicking in. And so thank you for that topic and for the chance to also get it out, because I have, it's the kind of thing that it's hard to even bring up
Yes,
in a way that will, because people will then want to judge too. And that was one thing we had to try to hold back for ourselves, is to not judge, but to just give that space for it.
yeah, and some of the work that we do is allowing people time and spaces to heal, and some people aren't ready, and they bring a lot of anger and they bring frustration, and sometimes that type of stuff can come right into the room. And also you might sort of say, oh, well, immersion, we got to get to immersion, we'll do immersion. But then how are you going to stop people from speaking English? And that sometimes is very hard. You got to just continually remind folks and continually come up with ways and ease people into it and have sort of systems. And I've seen a whole wide variety of ways to try and keep people in the language when you move into the language. However, I thought of it because we did an event a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and we've lost so many of our own speakers since that time. And we had Haida speakers there, we had Tsimshian speakers there, we had Tlingit speakers there. And the goal was to try and create as many high quality recordings of the language as possible and also create these language immersion environments. So they asked if I would help facilitate some things. And there were plenty of facilitators, and all of the facilitators had to let folks know if you can't say it in the language, you can't say it right now. And that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you, but that just means we're trying to create this place where a language lives and breathes. And so this is one of the difficult things that you'll find. If you're a language teacher, you probably already know. If you're going to be a language teacher, then you should know that people are going to find these ways to use as much English as they can, even when you're trying to not use English. And this could be people who fully know the language as well. So I could think all the way back to 21 years ago when I was going to one of my first immersion experiences. And they just talked to us and talked to us. They said, okay, don't use English when you're having meals. Don't use English, don't use English. And so I saw an elder. I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I said, what's that yeti? I'm good. And then, but it was just such a natural thing to respond in English, even if someone's speaking to you in Tlingit. And I think you're going to find some things. There's these disjunctures that we're going to have to figure out how to mend, because I have children who understand our language, and I tell people, I said, just speak to them. Go ahead, speak to them. And there's so many people who can speak the language who don't speak. They'll speak to them only in English. And I think it's also really interesting that that happens. But I think there's also a lot of things to that. We get these elders together. We said we just want to collect phrases so we can raise our babies in the language. So we need to know change the diaper, and the diaper's wet. Now just all these everything that we could think of, about raising children. And there's a point where an elder started to cry, and she said, so upset because I couldn't remember how to say change the diaper. And I just felt like I was right back in boarding school. I was in trouble again. So sometimes we trigger these traumas without meaning to, but then we also have these limited times, lots of things we want to do. And so going back to this November thing, I had to keep stopping people. They would switch to English, and I know it's hard. It's hard to stay in a language. And so I'd say, I'm sorry, but we have to be in Tlingit at this time. We would love to hear later, but we have the speakers. And I kept saying, I said, the way things are going, we'll never have this many speakers again unless we can keep in the language and sort of figure out how to move into the language. And so somebody came up to me, and I could tell they were angry by the way they were walking up. And so I was kind of preparing myself, and they came up and they said, you know what they did to us in the boarding schools? I was like, yeah, I know. She said, that's what you're doing to us right now by not letting us speak English. And I said, well, I hear what you're saying. I know it must be frustrating and difficult, but I don't agree that what I'm doing is similar to what happened in the boarding schools. I said, we're actually trying to put ourselves back into this space where we can recover from what happened to boarding schools, and we can't do that just by using English. And so, but it was really intense, and the intensities that we're going to see, I think we have to find ways to deal with them, and we have to find networks to strengthen ourselves, because it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. If someone wants to compare me to a boarding school teacher, yeah, I know what those people did. But then I also understand that people come from their own places and they deal with their own traumas, and we deal with our collective traumas in sometimes really challenging ways. Some of these things, like taking it out on each other, is something that really causes a lot of destruction in our language communities. And also forming groups that then don't like the other groups. Like there's so many different things that can pull us away from what the goal is, which is why I continue to look to programs who have done it, because if they're Indigenous and they have sort of figured out a way to make more speakers than they lose, then I want to talk to them because they probably have figured out some things. And part of it is to have plans, but to not make that your primary focus, because it could become a distraction from the actual development of language materials and speaking domains and opportunities. Any other thoughts on this? I want to recognize Sani for what you shared in the chat. The things that our ancestors and our relatives have gone through, it's almost unspeakable, the types of things that folks have gone through. And to think of how much work we have to do to overcome the systemic nature of cultural genocide in America. And it falls on such a small number of people with such a small and dwindling number of resources. But I think there are ways to look at these things and to use them as motivation, and to use them as a way to sort of say, okay, this entire system needs to be overhauled. Because even though the system doesn't do this anymore, it echoes itself, it reverberates to the point where I think when a lot of people want to stop the immersion event, I think somewhere, whether they want to admit it or not, it feels like going into a full immersion environment is something that's against the rules. And the rules are the thing, like a lot of us can be rebels, but then when it comes down to it, sort of like doing this thing, and it's not a rebellion, it's an embrace of our ancestors and our ancestral ways, and it's an embrace of ourselves. But I think these genocidal seeds have been planted to get us to avoid doing some of these things. And I think that's probably contributes to the fear of immersion environments as well. So some folks I know who studied Lingard for a long time, I was like, hey, this immersion thing, they'll say, I'm not ready for it. It's like, well, actually it's for everybody. But also like it's up to us as sort of organizers of immersion events to keep things fun, interesting, safe, and to try and find ways to get folks to just contribute and talk and laugh, share stories, and figure out how to transfer all the stuff they've learned and all the stuff they've internalized to a medium of communication. That's like that's the huge part. Any thoughts?
Katsure Khwaji. Yeah, Nikach Kenas Ach. I believe that too, that it reverberates off the land. And I'll wait until Monday to share about my family's experience with boarding schools. But I definitely want to attend the portion with the speaker about Douglas, because that's my experience. I live in an apartment on Douglas, and I think about it when I walk around, what happened out here. And I see a lot of strange things happening. Like there was an attempted stabbing in my apartment building. You know, I see violence happening in the streets here. And I don't know, I get an eerie feeling like I've been attacked by a dog here walking in the trails. And like, I don't know, it's something about it. I definitely want to attend if there's any kind of ceremony to acknowledge what happened. And, you know, I feel like that would go a long way here.
Yeah, I ran into Nakashan this morning and we spoke Tlingit for quite a while. It was just wonderful because uh, especially with the pandemic and trying to protect elders and then also trying to sort of, I'm already kind of, what would I call, I heard it the other day, um, an antisocial extrovert. I kind of like that term. I was like, yeah, like I need to be around people, but I'm like, people, well, yeah. And so like I can understand like feeling complex things about gatherings. But I used to really like gatherings because then there were chances to get speakers together. But then I've also, a couple of things that Nakashan and I talked about this morning is just how hard it is to live through this constant state of depression as you learn more and more and more of the language. And in your mind, you try to stay really hopeful and try not to be the one who cries like it's all dying all the time. But then you see all these speakers that you used to talk with, and then they're all gone. And then you know that they're not being replaced at a quick enough level with a high enough fluency. So it causes some depression, especially if you have elders you work with very closely, like Cyril George and George Davis and Marge Detzmer are probably the two that I worked with the closest, and Nora Downhauer. And when you're there as they're lost, you also feel a little frustrated, to just be honest about it, that so many people don't realize what we've just lost because they don't have that level. And it's not saying anything bad about our people, and not saying anything bad about what people are doing. But he and I were just reflecting on, we went to Glacier Bay, I think, in 2003, I think it was. So it was 18 years ago. And we said, I think there's only 2 speakers left from the 20 or so speakers that went there with us. And we're getting kind of sad. And then we're also talking about how we live with our depression. And this is all in Tlingit, and how we live with our depression and how we try to overcome it and get back to work. I've got a whole bunch of recordings of George I haven't even looked at yet because it's just hard. It's just hard because, I think, boy, that was my safety net. That was my box of wisdom. I could go with any language question I had. I could go and he would answer it. And so doing the work beyond that is a challenge. And then also dealing with the sheer violence that was enacted upon the land and upon the peoples, and the way that I think the colonial world has a reluctance, if not a refusal, to talk about those things. And so we just did a sign project last year for the Juneau area, and I was a consultant on it, as well as Akkoan people, because it's their land. But I was there to look at the Tlingit and some of the ways that things are worded. And I remember it's getting better, but I remember some of the words they would use and say, it's like basically saying it was some kind of transfer of land or something. I can't remember the terms they were using. I was like, that's a really gentle term for what you're talking about here. When you're pushing people off of their land and you're taking it and you're also forcing them into assimilation and you're torturing their children and you're removing the children from the homes and on and on and on and on. The amount of systemic, horrible ways that people have been made to suffer is really difficult. It's very difficult. And then I see people today who go and they show up to meetings wearing a yellow star. And, like, oh, wait, why are you wearing that star? It's because I'm being oppressed because I have to wear a mask. And so they're trying to equate, like, having to wear a mask or having to get a vaccination to go somewhere with something like the Holocaust, which is, as we look at what the Holocaust was, then we look at what happened in Native America, it's sort of like, boy, you really can't compare these things. But it's also, I think the level of suffering is not often talked about. And that means those who suffered are left to suffer by themselves. And so I think these things are important as we look at trying to remove the ways that Indigenous peoples are dehumanized and erased and invisibilized and ignored. And part of that means bringing the languages back to such a high level of use that everybody just knows it's going to be around. I had these people we rented from when we first moved to Juneau, and they said, yeah, we used to live in Juneau, and we used to hear Tlingit like all the time, everywhere. We just hear grocery store, post office. We couldn't speak it, but we could hear it, and we knew it when we heard it. And we went back there, and we don't hear it anywhere. And we lived here, and we don't hear it anywhere. And so, it's just we're up against it, but I think we're also, what we're trying to do is use these conversations and this information not to continue to get discouraged and depressed, but to say, okay, it's time for it to go back to a balanced place now. And that's going to take a lot of systemic changes and a lot of preparing yourself in case those arguments do come up where someone wants to maintain the hegemony and maintain the way that things are going. Sheesh. I know these are challenging conversations, so we're not going to have them that much, but we will have them. Yeah, in historical, life expectancies, violence rates, suicide rates, addictions, the ways that we can sort of mistreat one another. And so all of these things, mental health, and so just in terms of like as language communities as well, are we doing enough and how would we do more to talk about the levels of healing and things? And so at this event tomorrow, there's going to be clinical therapists there who are Indigenous. There's going, trying to figure out like what are the things that can start to put us on a path, and to also say like the land, it has a collective memory. Duck juice.
I'm taking historical drama course, and my non went to Chemawa Indian School in Salem, Oregon, between 1910 and 1911, and she was in the hospital for 4 months there with TB, and luckily she pulled through. But my non was, she was very healthy, and and yet she went blind from diabetes. And I used to wonder how she got diabetes. And then from this historical trauma course, I learned that it's from trauma. And they say that what they were abused so much that when they went back to their communities and started raising their own families, they abused some of them abused their kids because they learned that abuse from the boarding school. And my mother certainly went through that. When my mother was 9 years old, my non would make her make moonshine, and then she would make her sit at the table and drink it with her. And if she didn't sit down and drink with her, she got beaten with a broom. And I think all of that comes from boarding school.
Oh, and yeah, and to see like what are the exit points for these traumas from our families, from individuals, from our communities, so that we can find these release points. And so I do think talking through things, having ceremony, having it can't always be just like, okay, here's the class, we got 90 minutes, we got to read this stuff, we got to do these papers, but there's this whole other set of components that I think the language communities are going to have to enact and do with indigenous methodologies, so you can have ceremonies. So I have I've known Wayne Price for a long, long time, and we get together and we talk about all kinds of stuff. And one of the things I really liked is he's been going around and doing these healing totems, and now he's doing healing dugouts, and it's movements of sobriety, and it's also movements of talking out what kinds of things have caused us pain. And one of the things that he would do was take wood chips from the project, and folks would write names of people that they've lost to addictions, um, and then they would burn these wood chips in memory of the folks who they were remembering. And I took inspiration from that. And one of the language camps that we used to do in the summer in the interior, I was thinking about folks and what they go through. And I said, okay, you don't have to share this with anybody, but everybody take like these stacks of paper, these little pieces of paper. I want you to write down every single reason why you think you might not become a speaker, or that you might not speak the language. Just everything. Nobody's going to read it. You can write anything you want on there. I'm going to make a mistake. I don't feel smart enough. I don't have enough time. I don't think I can do it. Whatever the thing is, whatever it is. And I said, don't show anybody. This is your process. You could share with us later when we talk about it. But then we built a fire. We made a spirit dish for our ancestors. We put all the food that we were eating on there. We put some tobacco on there. And we said a prayer. And we asked them to take this stuff from us. That we don't need this stuff. Because I think part of our traumas, I think one of the things that complicates a lot of traumas for Indigenous peoples is the knowledge that everything's been taken from us. The land, children, the language, everything. Our traditional foods, access to those. So then I think what happens is people just hold on to stuff. So I realized this as we'd start talking about trauma and language learning, and people would put a bunch of stuff out. And then it felt like when it was done, they would like put it back in their bag and walk out the door. And it was sort of like, well, how do we get to the point where we actually release those things? And we just say, I'm not strong enough to carry this, and also I don't need to, and I can release it. And I think that's a big transition, and there's a lot to that. There's a lot, whether we're talking about individuals or collective. And that's where I think the ceremony is coming back. Because then we took all those little pieces of paper, and as we burned that spirit dish to feed our ancestors, we burned all those little pieces of paper. And some of it you could argue is just a symbol, it's just but there's a process to it. The physical process can connect to the emotional and the spiritual and the mental. And so trying to do these things and think about these conscious efforts to sort of do this for the purpose of just trying to find the easier path to bringing the language back to day-to-day use, so we can laugh, and we can tell stories, and we can just have fun. Victoria?
Sorry, I'm in my car waiting for my son to get out of jam. So if you hear the car, it's my car. My father, Doug Modig, I have two fathers, Reggie Nathan and Doug Modig, but Doug was, my Nagwadu Doug was in Taquan and Metlakatla when the elders were creating the dictionary. So I think that he had like a lot of really precious moments, and he got to sit and spend time with the elders, but he doesn't speak the language. Like he remembers some of the stuff I tell him and he wants to speak, but I guess he doesn't want to be embarrassed. So he'll come to the Saturday classes with everybody and he recognizes what they're saying, but he won't say it. And I'm going to put Hookians on the spot. One time Hookians told me that he forgot that his microphone was on and he could hear my father speaking. And I thought that was just precious that he was on the other end and just speaking our language, and he knows it. There's something that's holding him back. And the presentation I did last year for Das Nagwadu, the greetings that I made it for my dad, I gave it to him on Father's Day. It just so happens that we were talking and I shared it with him on Father's Day. And he really appreciates stuff like that. And he takes it to heart, but he just won't walk around speaking our language. And then the other thing I wanted to add was that my grandmother, Sarah Peel, she was in boarding school. I think she was in Chimawa too. And I didn't know that she had a twin sister, but she had a twin sister, Jessie Peel, who is buried down there. And then she also had a child when she was at boarding school. And she had twins. One of the babies passed away. So the baby is buried in the boarding school. And then the other one, my Uncle Mike, I don't know if she had why the baby was allowed to come home, but my Uncle Mike is still alive. So just precious stuff like that.
Yeah, direction. And I think having sessions where we share some of these things in English and then in the language, and then just sort of figuring out, because I think we need to be able to talk about everything in our language, including rough stuff, healing, these aspects. When people come back to the language as well, I know of two Tlingit women who, well, three actually. They were speakers from at birth up through childhood. Then something happened, and they lost the language, and then they taught it back to themselves. And they're really good speakers as well. And so I think about things like that as well, to sort of say, okay, when we talk about this stuff, when we look at this stuff, it's not all bleak hopelessness. It's actually this tremendous inspiration and their strength. As one time I was driving Marge home because we did some work over at George's, and she said, "Can you drive me home? My husband couldn't come get me today." I was like, "Yeah, no problem." So we're driving past Fred Meyer's, going towards the valley to her house, and she was just started sharing stuff that happened to her when she went to the school here over there in Douglas. And she said they tried everything. They tried to beat it out of me. They tried to shame me. They tried to scare me. They tried everything to get my language out of me. And I just said, no way, no way. And, and it was just so wonderful to hear her talk and to sort of, because she was doing all this language work at that time in her early 90s. And I would think about that stuff too, but gee, I'm just halfway to them, where they got to. So it's and sheesh, donation for sharing. Okay, you ready for something else? So we'll transition a little bit. We're going to talk about language documentation, which I think is tremendously important, and thinking about how languages are documented, what kind of work we might be doing in this area, and then also just thinking about not only the history of language documentation, but also our work in making sure that our languages are still being documented and that the information is accessible. So sometimes like I find these old photos and I've gone to a number of different archives and stuff, and I'm really interested in the history of this stuff. I also like to mess around with cameras and video cameras and recording equipment and all kinds of stuff. So I'm always interested in what people did and how they did it, why they did it. And I'm curious about, how can the Indigenous community maintain control of their language recordings and make sure that they're used for things that they want them to be used for, and that they can be accessed, and that it's the materials that belong to the Indigenous community. I did a digital fellowship at the American Philosophical Society, which at the time I applied for it, because I just heard about it. I didn't even know what it was. Anybody know what the American Philosophical Society is? Anybody tell me what it is? How it started? So when I heard about their funding, I was like, I don't do philosophy. I don't know. This is for people who sit around and think all day. Like I didn't know. I had no idea. But it's started by Benjamin Franklin. And so it's basically a library and a museum, and they're really interested in archives. They're really interested and have been interested in language documentation and preservation for Indigenous languages. They do quite a bit for Indigenous languages right now, and they're located in Philadelphia. There's a couple things I want you folks to know. The Andrew Mellon Foundation Native American Scholars Initiative, and also Indigenous Community Research Fellowships. There is funding available to support language archival work. They also engage in digitization projects. They had a lot of the De Laguna collection, and so they digitized it, and then they brought the whole collection. This one was documented in Yakutat. So they brought it to Yakutat. They said, here you go. This stuff it belongs to you guys. So they got good people over there. They're doing good stuff. Check out these fellowships. It was I would consider it kind of low-hanging fruit. It's not a whole lot, but it's something like $3,500 or something. And then at that time, they fly you to Philadelphia, and then they show you the collections, and then they run you through a few different sort of trainings and presentations. And I highly recommend it because it could lead to other fellowships and things of that nature. When we looked in their archives, I started thinking about this stuff. So when you're thinking about language archives, and I don't think it's good enough to have one in the state of Alaska. Like I think you need to think about the regions, the areas, what materials should be collected and kept where. But there's a number of things you got to think about. How are you going to store these materials? If you've got photographs, if you've got audio tapes that are cassette tapes or reel-to-reel, if you have books, if you have other things, like everything, one of the main goals, I think, of archiving is to make sure this stuff, we can slow down the degradation, because a tape will break. Everything's got a finite lifespan, all these different methods of recording things or writing things down. The book could start to fall apart. So how can we ensure that the language materials that we have are accessible 100 years from now when people are still speaking our languages, doing all kinds of rad stuff? So the care is another thing. Like, how are these things going to be cared for? So I know some people get upset because you got to wear gloves to touch the stuff because there's grease on your fingers and the grease will get on things, and that's going to help to contribute to it breaking down and falling apart. But also, how are you going to take care of access? If you have some kind of text that was created 120 years ago and it has your language in it, and you want people to be able to see it, how are you going to take care of that? And you don't always have to have everybody able to come in and physically touch the thing anymore. But then again, you might have some bandwidth issues in your community, so just because it's online doesn't mean it's accessible. And what about folks who are in camp and they want to have this thing to read while they're completely out of every cell service internet range? What kind of equipment do you need to have? And this could mean, I'm thinking of it pretty loosely, it could include facilities. It could include archival storage. It could include all kinds of stuff. Because you can send it out, but you can also build some stuff up in your own community. So you say, like, this stuff needs to be here. But you can also digitize an awful lot. So how do you acquire things as well? If your language is anything like Tlingit, you probably got whole families that have all kinds of tapes and all kinds of stuff. And how do you, if the people don't speak the language in the family anymore, how do you convince them to share it with those who do speak the language? Also, how do you sort of make sure that that it's safe to do so? That someone's not going to hand you, like, here's the recording, it's the only one left of my grandmother speaking our language, and then, like, you lose it, or you know, something happens to it. So you got to have, like, really good processes to take care of all of this stuff. And then how do you restore it? If it's a tape of a tape of a tape, there might be a lot of hiss and cracking and other stuff. And how do you get that noise out so you can work with it without blasting your ears out? So in thinking of stuff that I was seeing at the American Philosophical Society, you might have audio, you might have video, you might have some other form of media, which printed stuff. You might have some obsolete technologies, like you might have these mini discs that were just great at the time, but now nobody's got a mini disc player, these tiny DVDs, everything, you know, you might have some kind of special store, like I got it all on a jazz drive or something. And what are you going to do when that technology can't be accessed anymore? A lot of things just end up sunsetting. How do you transfer? And so sometimes, depending on the situation with your language, you might have to have a tape player and a reel-to-reel player and a mini disc player and a video formats. There's mini DV, Super 8. You might need to have a whole bunch of these players. And so maybe you got someone in your language movement who loves these technologies, and you can write some small grants and say, yeah, we'll get you a mini DV, tape reader, and we'll get you these types of things. But then how are you going to store this stuff? Where is it going to be? To store stuff at an archival level, you got to have a lot of climate control. So it's not going to be just your typical building. And sometimes when you get into some of the smaller communities, everything is damp and so much stuff, you can't have dampness problems. You cannot have problems with infestations or anything. There's a bunch of stuff you got to do. So sometimes they'll take things and when they get brought into places that have archives, they'll put them in a freezer for like a week or something. And the idea is kill any bugs that might be on. Then how are you going to have access to this? Because you don't want to have the other situation you don't want to have is someone says, you convince someone to give them the single copy of their grandparent that's speaking in the language, and they give it to you, and it doesn't get lost, but something happened, you move on to another job, or something happens, and now someone else takes over, and they're like, no, we're not going to let you listen to that. We protect our stuff. Because sometimes, I was in Kasan, and someone came over, and they had a presentation, and it was a wild presentation. But there was at one point he kept saying, and I got these tapes from the elders in Heidelberg. I was like, really? Is there language on it? And he said, yeah. I was like, can we get some copies? He said, no, it's just for the people of Heidelberg. I was like, well, my nanny's from Heidelberg. He's like, it's just the people from Heidelberg. I was like, what are you talking about? So sometimes we also were like, and this happened with other stuff too. Like I was living in Skagway working for the tribe, and I heard there was a whole bunch of recordings about the history of Skagway and indigenous peoples that was taken for ANCSA. So I called to see Alaska, and I knew the person who answered the phone. I was like, hey, I just heard you guys got these recordings about Skagway, and didn't even let me finish what I had to say. He just said, you're not going to get in it. You're not going to get access to that. And I said, wait, what are you talking about? I was like, I just want to hear it. I want to learn what our elders had to say about our area in the 70s. I think that's amazing. And that person said, you're not going to get access to that. I said, well, why not? And they said, we're protecting it. I said, well, who are you protecting it from? And they said, we're protecting it for the Klan. And I said, we're the Klan. What are you doing? Yeah, and so as we sort of like, don't lock stuff up. Because again, I think we've lost so much. There's a fear someone's going to exploit it. But I don't, we'll get to access in a second. So I want to show you folks, anybody seen either of these things before? Picture on the left or the picture on the right? Anybody know what they are? Everybody here?
Wax recording?
Yeah, so on the left side, this is what they call a wax cylinder recording. So I had heard this term, like Swanton and others who came through and they recorded on these wax cylinders. And for some reason, my brain, it was like a gigantic, I thought it was like some gigantic thing made out of wax. I had no idea what a wax cylinder was. In my brain, I think it was the size of a barrel and the texture of a candle. I just had no clue. But this is a wax cylinder. And so this could hold, let me open up the chat. Maybe it was in the chat. It could hold, I think, about 3 minutes of audio. And that's why most hit songs are about 3 minutes long. Because this is how music was shared a long time ago. And then it just sort of became standardized that a pop song needs to be 3 minutes. I was like, what? That's wild. So these were used to record indigenous languages. Not very high quality in terms of the amount of noise you get in the background. And this one on the right is a wire recording. So this is a spool of wire. It's actually kept in a tape container. So I think the container might be from something else, but I'm not too sure. This is what Frederica de Laguna recorded the Tlingit language on. So if you hear Tlingit language, it was initially recorded on this tape. I guess it might be Puchain, Frank Italio, like on this medium right here. And I didn't even know that that's how, I was like, it's a wire? Well, how did, so there was some kind of system that recorded on that wire. So it was really fun to sort of think about that. Then they showed us this thing. It was like this was for, I think, Cherokee language and some kind of wild, like, see-through record, And so just thinking of the technologies that have been used to record languages, it was pretty fun to sort of look at and to think of where we're at now, because you can do a lot with your phone. You could do a lot with recorders. You could do a lot with everything. But what you have to have is a reliable system to pull it off the device, put it into a safe place, and then create access for it. Ideally, you've got it in a couple of safe places, and it's different now than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you didn't have the level of cloud access that you do now. And you might feel nervous about cloud access, but it seems to be pretty reliable. And so you can have a copy on a Google Drive or a Dropbox, and then you can also have a copy that's on your local computer, and they can synchronize, but that way if something happened in the whole Google universe, you would have it on your local computer. And then if something happened on your local computer, you would have it in the Google universe. And ideally, you would have archival DVDs and CDs, and you would burn copies onto those, and you would keep those in a separate location than the computer that the things are on. In case there's some kind of fire, in case something happens, someone steals a thing, you never know what kinds of things are going to happen. So if you're not familiar, you should check out the Alaska Native Language Archive. When you go to their website, you can search the collections. And so you can have a title. You can just select the language. You can just select Haida and just hit search. And it'll pull up everything that has Haida. And in fact, I think we'll take a look at this. So hold on. So let's just walk through how you might do a search. So this is the Alaska Native Language Archive. So I typed into a search engine, Alaska Native Language Archive, it came up. And so I can come down here and I'll go down, and I'm just going to pick Haida and I'll hit search and we'll just see what comes up. And they've done a lot of work. This is a lot faster than it used to be. So one of the things as you go through is it'll have a title. It'll tell you who's on there. So you might go through and say, whoa, there's my uncle, there's my grandma. If it has this little picture of what looks like a tiny compact disc next to it, that means that there should be a digital version available. So we can go through and we can look at things. And as you go through, you might see, oh, well, this might not have much, but this might have more. And so some of it might be just linguistic work about your language, which might be really interesting, but for some, it might not be too useful. Here's Edward Curtis cylinder recording, so you might say, whoa, like that, I'm pretty curious about that. So if we click on this string of, so this is the accession number, so they all have sort of a code and then a series of numbers. So if I click on that, I can get some more detail. So Haida, Skidegate, Queen Charlotte Islands, dancing song. And so it kind of gives you some of the content that's on there, which if your language has a whole bunch of stuff that's been documented already, a really worthwhile project is to pay some speakers to just listen to it and write down a short list of what's on there. Because then you could build a finding guide like this one. So usually there's a file, and so this says PDF, so we'll click on it and just see what happens. And so we end up with this, and it doesn't show us, it might not give us the files that we can listen to. But there's a bunch of work that we might be able to do and try and figure out, like, is this collection, is this up there in Fairbanks? And so, but it says text here, so they might not have the audio. This might just be a list of the things that are there. So we'll go look at one more and see if we'll try and find one with some audio.
If you click audio instead of both, you will just get audio.
Oh, nice. How So now I can grab one of these. So it says Haida recording set to, and it lists the speakers who are on here, and then we can go down, and then it lists the files. And what we would probably look for is the wave files with the speakers. And so this looks to me like beginning Tlingit. So some of the things you're going to have different things in the same collection. So if we go here and we click on this item, it does. I don't know if I shared the sound. Hold on.
Spanish had I award I good king tagang and hededu agyal angus eating.
So your browser might look a little different. I'm using Google Chrome. but there should be options, either these dots here, and you can download this. So then you have it in your own collection. And you could do this, a lot of languages in this collection. And then another project that you could do, so if you're looking for funding, the Administration for Native Americans has really accessible funding for building a language program and then building an immersion program. Those are the two major things that they sort of fund. The National Science Foundation and the National Endowment of the Humanities, they collaborate and they have pools of funding that are for language documentation. So maybe you say, I want to get a camera, a nice movie camera. I want to get some nice microphones. I want to get a computer so that I can keep track of this stuff. I want to get a year-long subscription to Google Drive or whatever you're going to get. And then you put together a project. And you say, we're going to make 20 videos of speakers. And then you go and you engage with the speakers and you try and keep them in the language. So then you might have other things too, like digitizing digitizing some things that are already out there. So you might say, okay, I want to get a tape to CD recorder. I want to get a program. I highly suggest this program called iZotope, which I'll show you folks, and I'll show you some of the things that it can do. And I missed something in the chat. There are lots of things that we can go and look for. Here it is. So this program iZotope is it's fairly expensive. But if you have access to grants and funding like that, actually I'm going to share my whole screen with you folks for a second. Well, maybe not. And then, so you can open a recording. So say open, let me go find, I think I have some stuff here. So I might open a speaker here and then we'll just give it a listen. Hold on, let's see if I can go. Okay. Can you folks hear that? I don't think it's going through what I want to. So there's a bit of background noise in there. Like, I don't know if you folks can hear, but you hear this hum, and there's the creaking of the microphone, which will be tough to take care of. But there is, if you scroll down here, this effect called spectral denoise, which do you folks see a little pop-up window, or do you just see the main window that's on there? Do you see something that shows these little waves going down, these little lines going down?
The pop-up window almost showed. It hovered in and then back out. There it is. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. So when you push this, so this is what comes up, and then you can determine like how much noise it's going to sort of look, and it looks for the noise, and then it just kind of scrubs it out. So I'll hit this preview button, and you'll hear, and then I'll push this compare button, and you hear what it's like with it and without it.
I don't think I hear it right now.
So it can really get rid of a lot of background noise without affecting the quality of the audio. So it's about $1,000. So, I would say go find someone who can buy it for you. And the thing about the Administration for Native Americans is that funding needs to go through either a tribe or an ANCSA corporation. The National Science Foundation is a bit more open. But typically it doesn't often go to individuals, but they do have fellowships and other things like that. And if you folks are interested in those opportunities, I can help connect you with folks who work there and who help distribute some of these funds. They're really amazing folks because you can actually talk to them quite a bit before you even apply, and then they know that your application is coming, and they can, they really want to see success. So some of the things they like to see is videos and access to recording and some kind of plan to make it accessible. They like to see dictionaries and grammars and things that are being made, learning textbooks and stuff like that for the language. So the other thing is just thinking of the metadata that you might have. So the metadata, and I'm not an archivist and I don't know how to build effective databases or anything like that. But you got to have a good way of naming your files. So typically I would put the date of when things are made. So if you had a recording from June 7th, 2007, I would name that file 2007-0607. So I would put the date, I would put the year in 4 numbers, I would put the month in 2 numbers, and I would put the day in 2 numbers. That way it's going to just organize stuff from oldest to newest, and it's kind of easy to find it that way. I would also create folders for sets of collections. Like if someone gave me a box of recordings, and each of those recordings were in a Ziploc bag and says, here's recordings from this potlatch, here's recordings of my uncle, here's recordings that my auntie gave me. Then I would sort of have those within a folder as I digitize them, just so it says, however you gave them to me, I'm organizing them pretty much that same way. So that would be the collection name. Then I would develop usually a spreadsheet that just has maybe a description. And sometimes someone gives me tapes, and I'll just sort of put what's on the tape because I'm not an archivist and I'm not an archive center. But if you had one, you would probably find, like another project would be, oh, we got these 50 tapes that come from Theogovic, and they're digitized already, but we want to just know what's on them because we can speak the language a little bit, but not enough to know, if I listen to that whole tape, I don't know. But you could pay a speaker, you could do a project where you pay someone to come in and do something like this, what Sea Alaska Heritage did. They paid speakers to listen to it and just write down a summary of this. He's talking about this, he's telling this story, he's talking about this thing. And then you create a list of that, and then you have a finding guide. Then if you're good and you could build a database, you can incorporate this in there. If you're not, you can just make a long document and folks can take a look at that. The other thing to think about are access levels. For me, I deal with an endangered language, so I just say make it all available. I don't know. But I do know that there are conversations about some people don't want it to be available for everybody. Some people, and you might get a wonderful recording and then their relative finds out about it and says, I don't want you to have that. I don't want anybody to have that. It gets a little weird sometimes with sharing and maybe holding on again a little too tight. Any thoughts? I got a few more slides, but I think I'll stop there. So I got 5 minutes left. I want to see if anybody has any thoughts, questions, contributions, ideas.
I don't know if it was just me, but I wasn't able to hear the audio when you shared the iZotope samples. But does it do quite a better job than Audacity in cleaning up the audio quality?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know where it was sending the audio, so sorry about that. A lot of times when you're dealing with audio programs, they route them differently through your computer. But yes, it does a way better job. So Audacity does have the ability to, like, if you're working in a recording and there was some kind of weird thing that was beeping in the background, you could use Audacity to go find that beeping and delete just that beeping. Or I'm thinking of Adobe Audition. So it does, and in Audition you can also find like a hum You could sample that sound and you could say, get rid of this sound. But if you've got a lot of tape, hiss, and other stuff, and you start trying to take away too much, you end up with these weird digital noise that gets left over. So I tried to do a recording one time and it came out and it just had a bunch of weird noises in it because the program could no longer decipher between what was the noise and what was the actual speech act. I think iZotope does a really good job of just sort of finding everything that's typical noise and getting rid of it. And you can do it all with one button. If you got a really sort of noisy recording, you can run it through twice. But then you can even clean up some stuff, like if there's a lot of mouth noise from a recording or something, you get rid of some of that. So I definitely think it's worth it. And I use it on pretty much even recordings that I make, because it'll pick up the hum of some kind of heating system in the room, or even the recorder itself. It might be picking up its own twirl. Most of them are digital these days anyways, but it might be picking up something from that. So I think it works really good. Anything else, folks? So before we go, if we look at the syllabus, we do see this thing on here called a midterm research paper. It's time to start thinking about that. What I would like you to do is to find an established Indigenous language education program and just analyze it. Write about what it is, how it supports itself, what its successes are, and maybe failures was the wrong word. Challenges, and I would also like you to sort of put in there like what sort of things from this program could apply and how to what you're trying to do. As far as when this paper will be due, we're looking at the end of October. And I think it should be somewhere around 8 to 10 pages, and I think it should be using around 8 to 10 sources. If that sounds like a lot, let's talk about it. But you do have 1 month from today to write a paper. And you're picking one language program. So don't try and compare every language in the world to what you're trying to do, but just sort of, it's a chance to take a deep dive where they look at Hawaii, Sami, Mohawk, Anishinaabe. Like Anishinaabe has a whole language school. Yupik. It should be a language, it shouldn't be your own language at this point. It should be another language that you're looking at, and you're writing a detailed analysis of that. You could look at the history of it. You could look at some of the things that got it off the ground. You can try and find things that they had to overcome. And then you could look at things that you think are really working and things that might need some improvements. And then bring that back to your own language program, maybe towards the end of the paper, and what kinds of things could apply to your own language to contribute to the language health. Any questions on that? I'll send out a thing next week that has expectations of the paper, and we'll just keep talking about it. I'm gonna fish out some stuff from you folks so we make sure we're on track to completing a paper. Don't stress about it. There's lots of resources to help you, no matter what kinds of things you might need help with. We can use our class time to go do some research, go find some sources for things that you might be sort of thinking of. There's also some films, I'll get a list of some films that I know of that talk about language revitalization. There's a really great film on the Wampanoag and what they're doing. There's great films on Hawaii and what they've done. And I'm sure there's some out there for the Ojibwe Language School in Wisconsin, Navajo language programs, lots of stuff. Okay, anything else? Have a fantastic weekend, folks. Remember, practice self-care, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and always try to do this stuff with a sense of healing and unity. You know, can't all be united, but we can get close and just try and find ways to help your people and help yourself. Sheesh. Wayana.
No,
Oh, Oikshin.
Anamase.
Anabas.
How many?